Hi there, and welcome to another edition, chapter, offering of our Theology 101 series. And today we are looking at our Hope Beyond, Part 2. Part 1 was sent out, and you can find it on our website. It was sent out about 2 weeks ago. So today we are continuing in this theme of our Hope Beyond, and we are focusing in more specifically on death. Death and also the biblical concept of immortality that is resurrection. That is resurrection. Next time, which is in another 2 weeks, we'll focus more specifically on heaven, the concept of hell, and the last judgment. But today we are more specifically thinking about death and resurrection. So, death, as we all know, is something we all must face as human beings. We cannot escape death, as healthy and protected as we may be. It's something that will come to each and every one of us, to our loved ones, sometimes sadly, much sooner than we would hope. And other times, at the end of a life that has been well lived, it becomes more an offering, a service of thanksgiving and celebration, and a little less one of that sadness, because there's so much in a life that's been given, a full life that's lived, that we can celebrate and remember, and it lives in us, the next generations, and also in the many ways those who have died have served the wider world and community. And also our hope that they are in God, that they are safe, that they are at rest in the heavenly realm, and also that they live on, that their spirits, that their presence continues to be felt not only in our memories, but also in an ongoing way, whether visitations in our dreams or other ways, certain sensations, smells, even sometimes appearances. You know, it happens in all kinds of ways that the people who have died continue to live in us. So, specifically, death. Is it a flaw in creation? Is it intentional on God's part? Is it sort of part of a process of, when we have vulnerability in our lives, and when we have something we have to face, sometimes it can challenge us and inspire us to grow. And is death part of that invitation to grow? I think any challenge is, but why death? It's interesting because in the Bible there are aspects of it. For instance, the Apostle Paul, who also sees death as a symbol of our fallenness in need of redemption, that perhaps was this always the design? Maybe, maybe not, but death is also a sign of the fact that we are mortal, that we do die, that we must face, in a sense, not only the fact that we're fragile and mortal, but that somehow we also make mistakes. We're part of the mistakes that others have made as well, and we become part of that cycle. The biblical word is sin. The bad choices we make that follow bad consequences. People are hurt. People feel betrayed, disappointed, let down. People suffer, and it's not always just because they're mortal and physical and just the sadness, the unfortunate fact of the genetics or whatever else, but also because people do harmful things to other people. And we are sometimes part of that cycle with our words, our thoughts, our actions, and so on, the grudges we hold on to, the isolation. So death is part of that package, according to the Apostle Paul, and there's a journey of redemption we must all face in this life, beginning in this life, but also in the life to come. And we'll talk more about the life to come next time, but in this session, I do want to talk about the resurrection itself. Okay, so where are we at now? If you read the written portion of this chapter, it's much better organized than the way I'm doing it now. So In the Bible, there is an evolution when it comes to this whole concept of resurrection. In the earlier parts of the Bible, in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, there is no concept of a life beyond death. Death is terminal, it's final. There is this shadowy, ghostly existence called Sheol. You know, we hear it mentioned in the Psalms, for example, and in other parts. It's that shadowy existence, you know, it's like, you know, someone living as a ghost. It's not a happy place. It's a kind of sad place. The Greeks, ancient Greeks, have the concept of Hades, which is similar. You know, it's not a good place to be, and yet so this life is what it is, and this is where you have it, and anything beyond is not, you know, anything to look forward to anyway. But later on, with the Hebrews in particular, this is well before the time of Jesus, hundreds of years before Jesus. The concept of an afterlife, of resurrection, and even the life after, judgment, heaven, hell, all those things began to emerge. And part of the reason for that was that the Hebrews were living under such duress, such suffering, such injustice under colonial domination, atrocities of all kinds, that this concept of an afterlife emerged. It was imaginative, and yet, you know, sometimes when we're pressed, things come in our lives, beliefs come, and does that make them false because they're under duress? Or are we pressed to see something that maybe has always been there, but we just did not see it before, right? And so it's not for us to judge, you know, is this literally true? Who has been to the other side and come back to tell us? You know, there are, you know, kind of, you know, near-death experiences, but these are few and far between, right? So the Hebrews came up with this concept of an afterlife, and it was a place of where justice would come, where justice in this life has not come, where things would be made right in the life to come, where they're not made right here, where those who have suffered, and especially those who have suffered unjustly and innocently, will find not only their rest, but their comfort, their sense that they will receive so much more in the life to come that they did not receive in this life. And now, would that encourage a kind of escapism or like an oblivion to what's happening now? No. It actually gives you courage to resist even those tyrannical forces, knowing that even if you die in your resistance, you know, you will be not only rewarded, but comforted, that God is on your side, that vindication will come, that eternity is much longer than this life. This life is maybe 70, 80, 90 years. In our day and age, maybe even 100. But eternity, that's forever. And if eternity is on your side, then those who have committed injustice must face that injustice in some way. And so we'll talk more about the after, the last judgment and all that next time. But just for the interest now is this idea of an afterlife and the idea of resurrection. And resurrection itself is different than immortality in the sense that sometimes there's this idea, certainly the ancient Greeks had it, where the spirit and the body are two things. And they come together in this life, but they separate in the life to come, that somehow our spirits are eternal, but our bodies, you know, they come and they die, they decay. And we know that physically bodies do decay and all kinds of things happen to them, you know, even cruelties and so on in war or fire or whatever else. And bodies are disfigured and so on, and they decay and so on. The bones remain, but everything else goes. But for the Hebrews, you know, our bodily existence is part of who we are, right? We identify each other in some kind of bodily form. I know you, not just as spirit, I know you in your embodied totality, right? And part of that is embracing us and how we are in all our so-called imperfections, but the beauty that God sees in us in all our totality, even as we age. Right? And so the idea that somehow the resurrection of the dead would be a reconstitution of our bodies with our spirits to be one. Perhaps in the meantime, between now, there would be a resurrection at the end of time, whenever that came. But in the meantime, we inhabit this place called heaven, this dimension of reality, which folds into this reality, but we can't get from here to there, there to here, until death. Death is that transition point. And heaven is that place of rest, of comfort, of peace. In the heavenly realm, more of a spiritual existence. But at some point, we await the final resurrection of the dead, where our bodies are some type of bodily totality, so that we know each other, we recognize each other. Heaven is a place where we're not disembodied spirits where we meld into some larger whole, but we are ourselves. That's a beautiful thing, the people we have loved, the connections we have made, the reparations and relationships we continue to grow, to heal, to journey, to find our rest in the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, which is our growth in love with one another, because only love lives in the heavenly realm. Hate is banished. Cruelty is banished. There is no place for evil in the life to come, right? So that's resurrection. But what does Jesus introduce that is unique? For Jesus, what Jesus brings into the equation is that resurrection begins here and now. Death is a transition, but it's especially only a transition because resurrection begins here and now. This is what he tells Martha. Remember in the gospel, the story of Lazarus, the raising of Lazarus. Before he raised Lazarus, he talks to the sisters, Martha and Mary. And to Martha in particular, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, though they die, yet shall they live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Jesus is speaking metaphorically here. We do die physically, but he's saying that it's a transition into something more that has already begun to happen here and now in our spirits. The Apostle Paul speaks about the first fruits of the Spirit that have already begun, the first fruits of the resurrection that has already begun in us through our spirit being connected to God in love, through Christ living in and through us, through the Spirit flowing in and through us, that somehow we have already begun to experience the first fruits of the resurrection to be much more fully manifested in the life to come and ultimately in the resurrection of the dead. So it's a beautiful image, the idea that binding ourselves to Christ, being changed in our hearts, being open to love, to grow, the challenge of loving in a life, in a world we live in, right? But that somehow that challenge is not just about us being better people, but it's about receiving the love of God, opening our hearts to it, and knowing that ultimately this will be continued in the life to come. That somehow death separates us physically from those we love, and yet there's a fuller story to be lived, and all those who are here and now, and they will join us at some point in this ongoing journey of love growing. It's a beautiful idea that Jesus introduces, and he himself, right, dies and resurrects, and he is alive, and they witness him. So this is the first fruits of the wider resurrection of the dead to happen, and we follow in those footsteps in some way. Again, next time we will look at the fuller dimensions of this, but I hope you have enjoyed this excerpt, this podcast of Theology 101. Thank you.